James.
Raf.
Apple.
I have a amusing Apple anecdote, actually.
Shoot. Well, now you've just said it was amusing. We'll be the judge of that. It better be good now.
Okay,
so
yeah,
if
that's
you
true.
just said I've got an anecdote,
Yeah, I used to work at the Apple Store. I used to work at the Apple Store while that was my uni job.
you're a genius.
I was, yeah. Actually, you know what? I wasn't. I worked at the Genius Bar, but I never ascended to that level. Kind of like the squire to the geniuses.
Right.
You know. Anyway, so I worked there for a number of years while I was at uni. You know what? Good uni job. As far as retail jobs go, it was actually pretty good. One of my jobs there was I ran like those workshops. Like you get old people coming in wanting to learn how to use iMovie or iPhoto or whatever.
Yeah. Da Vinci.
What?
Wait, what was the photo editing one called?
Aperture.
Aperture.
Where did Da Vinci come from?
I don't know. Maybe it's the GPT model.
Yeah, I think it is actually. Anyway, so I was doing that. One of the things that Apple used to do, I don't know if they still do it, but they had a little event called Apple Camp. And basically what it was like that, but for kids.
Yep.
It happened during the school holidays. Kids would come in over the course of 3 days, and it was like 90-minute sessions every day to learn how to use iMovie. They would come in on the first day and storyboard a movie.
Yeah.
They'd go home and they'd film it. They'd come in the next day. They'd make it in iMovie on the Apple Store computers.
Nice.
And then they'd come in on the third day, and it was a film festival.
Huge.
And all the local kids would show all this sort of shit, right? And it was lovely. The most shocking thing for the parents was that because none of us had working with children checks, they couldn't actually leave their children for that 90 minutes, which horrified a lot of them because they were there to shop and they thought they could just dump their kids at the Apple Store for 90 minutes. Anyway, I ran it one of these years and I was working with a bunch of these kids on the storyboarding section, helping them draw their little movies that they were going to make. I wasn't really paying super close attention to what they were doing, helping them do it. They went home, they shot it, they came back. Second day, I was helping them make it. Again, I was being pulled between probably 15 kids, 15, 20 kids on
Try
these.
being a parent.
On these, I'll tell you what, certainly felt like it that day, but I was like 21 or something. Anyway, so I didn't really see what they were doing until the kids came in on that second day to make their movie. And then I realized that one of the kids, whose storyboard I didn't pay particular close attention to, had created a recreation of 9/11.
Okay, this is an amusing story.
with Lego.
That's not funny.
So it was technically very impressive. So it started with like sweeping views of Manhattan recreated in Lego.
Okay, nice.
Panning shots, people in cafes having lunch, enjoying themselves, walking Fifth Avenue, and then hard cut to a Qantas plane on a string bobbing into the frame. And it slams into this immaculately recreated Twin Towers. And then he shows it collapsing. It wasn't like he didn't fully go into like stop motion, but it kind of topples and collapses and whatever. Hard cut, a stormtrooper wedding.
Did he explain the context of that?
No, I think that was just like, I don't know, it was just a little bit
It was
of
a mistake.
little bit of a director trademark or something. But the funny thing is that I had to kick that up the chain because the third day of this Apple Camp was a film festival, which I was hosting. All the parents at the back of the Apple Store and whoever else decided to watch. And I was supposed to interview this kid on a director chair and be like, what was the idea? So this kid who had made like this visceral 9/11 recreation, I had to speak to Apple marketing in Australia and that got kicked up to Apple marketing in California. It got elevated right up the chain to the top of the command as to whether this kid in Bondi was able to show a 9/11 recreation at the Apple Store Bondi Junction.
Well, what was the answer?
Yes.
That's good. That was an amusing story. Tim Apple, he wants his iPod.
Yeah, Tim Cook wants his legacy solidified. We've mentioned a couple of times before on the pod, but Apple's next big thing, pretty much guaranteed at this point, there's been so much reporting on it, is their alternative reality or AR headset, which has been called like Project Reality. It's kind of a statement piece. I think the idea is that they don't want, at least a lot of the reporting says, they don't expect that everyone's going to buy this.
Yeah.
It's meant to be for an early adopter thing.
Yeah, kind of like the Apple Watch when it first came out wasn't intended to be mass market. They didn't produce that many of them.
Yeah, it was meant to be like a fashion piece.
Yeah.
It was like that's why when the Apple Watch first came out, they released like that $38,000 gold one. The idea is that this is going to be them showing off. This is what we think the successor to the iPhone is this like headset that projects stuff over your vision. But crucially, it's also the first product at Apple which Tim Cook has like a really, really strong role in creating. Because all the other stuff, including the Apple Watch, which came out years after Steve Jobs died, peace be upon him.
It was still part of the roadmap.
It was part of the roadmap, and he had like contributed pretty significantly to its in the original conception or whatever. So it's an interesting time to talk about Apple because it is at a transition point. It's not controversial to say that they were the dominant company of the 2010s.
Yeah. It is worth saying as well, though, on this headset, before we go any further, that not only is this going to be Cook's kind of piece de resistance or whatever, his big product, he's apparently overruled the designers. The designers don't want to release it.
Yeah, they say it's not ready. It needs a few more years in the kitchen.
Yeah, to cook, we need to just let it simmer. But no, Tim's saying we're going ahead with it. Overruled from the big guy.
Yep.
We got to release it.
Yep.
Because you're dead right. They've been dominant for 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. And like it's basically their world they've created. You can get into the sort of thing where it's like, Apple put widgets on the iPhone, but Android had it first. That's true. But Android is like completely operating in the paradigm that Apple invented.
Well, Apple wasn't first to like any one feature, really.
No.
They just actually made it usable.
They just made it, dominant. I think it's pretty clear the iPhone won the smartphone wars. I think that's pretty evident.
Yeah, and it's more evident every month.
Like Android still to this date has a larger install base, I believe, including everything from like the cheapest smartphones all the way to the most expensive.
But Apple's making inroads, as we see. They keep releasing kind of these cheaper iPhones that are lower and lower down, and they're making massive inroads even into the lower end of the market.
Yeah. The Financial Times did a story the other day which basically described how massively dominant the iPhone is amongst Gen Z.
Yeah, it's like in America, it's something like 61%, which is enormous.
Which is absurd. And
given that, like, when we talk about Android, we're talking about like multiple manufacturers, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And Samsung obviously being the biggest one, but there are a million different Android brands. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that Zoomers think that people who send green message bubbles are basically lepers in their social hierarchy, which is true. That's true.
Back in the day, Apple, those internal emails were released and they were arguing over, like, should we make iMessage cross-platform, basically?
Yeah.
Do we want it to be the dominant messaging platform across all platforms, or do we want to keep it basically locked down to iPhone only as kind of like a feature? And it turns out, if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said that they should have made it universal and made it the universal messaging system that makes sense to be installed on as many people's phones as possible, especially when they were going down the route of, like, they have it now. I rarely use them. You can kind of have apps for Messenger, and you can some of them like Connect 4 Games or whatever. But there's also various third parties can make their own apps for it. Like Uber has like some kind of plug-in to Messenger and blah, blah, blah. In that kind of WeChat everything app vein. When that was more the zeitgeist, it's like, well, yeah, they definitely should be on everyone's phone because in the future we'll be able to order apps through iMessage, blah, blah, blah. So of course they want to be on the Google and stuff. It now turns out that, and this is, I guess, what Apple do that other companies don't, and the kind of things they think about that other people don't, which is that luxury brand mentality of the desire to be part of the kind of social cohesion and blah, 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 blah. And effectively the desire to be cool outweighs any benefit you get to the volume play in that, especially among Zoomers, apparently having green text in Messenger is just so...
Black mark.
It's just embarrassing.
Yeah. I think one of the key things with apart from the fact that, yes, the iPhone was completely revolutionary and whatever and inaugurated our current age, and like they had already built the infrastructure with the iPod, which is also a revolutionary device, and digital distribution of music, blah, 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 blah. I think what was kind of revealed was that the Apple way of doing things, which is occasionally incredibly frustrating, like things being locked down, taking ages for new features, like new things that people expect to arrive because they just are resistant to doing it, annoying shit with cables, all the kind of, everything that is annoying about Apple, their walled garden, quote unquote.
Yeah, and only allowing use of Apple Payments as the payment platform for all apps on the App Store, etc.
It turned out that all that stuff was like perfectly aligned for like the moment. And obviously, there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing where it's like, would this have been the way that computing developed without the iPhone? Maybe not. But there's a reason why it turns out that Zoomers are worse at using computers than millennials, is because they've been raised with a completely functional and beautifully operational closed system.
Yeah.
The way that they've arranged things has been relatively perfect for the way technology was going, especially now that we're getting to a point where it's like, with all the developments in AI and shit like that, are we even going to have the web, or is it all going to be like weird AI-enabled apps?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
But they are placing this big... Well, it's not a big bet because it's Apple, and they'll do it in a smart way, which is they'll release probably an overpriced headset in very small quantities that they don't expect to be particularly large, and they'll see how it goes, and they'll iterate on it and make it better. I mean, it's worth talking about Johnny Ives here.
Yeah.
iPod, iPhone, AirPods, original Apple Watch, MacBook Air, MacBook Pro. Massively influential, obviously, product designer. Some may say that in his later days, and by some I mean I would, and I think it's generally accepted, he probably went too far. Like, he was, I guess, the encapsulation of that idea that Apple is like, the customer doesn't know what they want. We know. We're going to tell them what they want. And that's never actually been true. That they do heaps and heaps of customer research, and then they interpret kind of what the customer are telling them, rather than just, I guess, the Amazon model, which is just whatever the data shows, just reflect that on the customers. And we've talked about it before, that like Amazon is this horrible mess of like, yes, that is what the public want, whereas Apple are able to kind of interpret those signals and then have their own...
Pose their own, like...
Yeah, exactly. But you end up with beautiful products that are highly functional and make a lot of sense. But he probably took it too far in the end.
Because he was like a lieutenant of Steve Jobs or whatever, and like really close with him. He was always the guy that was making designs that were not very practical. Like, fundamentally, they were more about looking beautiful and seeming like something lovely to hold in your hands.
Yeah, like the Apple mouse or whatever.
Yeah, well, the one with the fucked underside charging or whatever.
There was apparently, small aside, like the complaint about the Apple mouse. I mean, I think in general, the Apple mouse is too low. It's like it's not really very ergonomic.
It feels terrible. Yeah.
But you have to use it because it's the only one that's got side swiping. But anyway, the complaint that you have to plug the charger into the bottom of the Apple mouse. Apparently, the justification for that, because obviously you can't use the mouse while it's charging, they were like, if we put the charger on the front, people will just have it plugged in the entire time.
Yeah.
And we don't want that. No, we don't want people to be using it with a cable in the whole time. We want it to be separate.
So wireless,
that way they have to turn it over and not use it in order to charge it.
Yeah, which is kind of, sums up his sort of approach to things. So it's like, no, you must respect the device.
And he went too early he removed all the ports from the MacBook Pro and
had to put them back.
They put it back after he no longer had as much power. They put the HDMI cable and a bunch more USB ports back on.
There was a recent feature about the fact that the old Apple power structure was like design would give like an absolutely insane design to engineering, and it was their task to like figure out how they can make it work. And that was very successful for a long time, but at the end of his sort of reign, that ended up not working. So you got MacBooks that had like awful keyboards that looked amazing, but felt like shit and broke all the time. As you say, like the ports not functioning, the AirPower debacle where they tried to make that charging mat that looked beautiful and let you charge everything at once. And turned out that very concept like defied the laws of physics and couldn't be made.
Yeah, the Apple Watch and the iPhone use different charging coil technologies, but you were supposed to be able to put either of them anywhere on the charging mat and they would both charge, and it turns out it would just set itself on fire.
It would explode and kill you. Yeah, exactly. Which is not very Apple for something like that to happen. Johnny Ive left Apple a few years ago and started his own design agency, which also like contracted with Apple.
Yeah, for $100 million a year, I believe. Is it called Love?
Love From.
That's right.
Yeah, terrible. Like capitalize L and F and all one word.
But their contract is finally ended.
Yeah, it's over. And it seems like they contracted a little bit on the headset. And the information reported that there was a huge debate. One of the current features of the headset apparently is that there's like a big thick cable that connects to like a battery pack. Or at least that was, at one stage it was. And that was something that gave like Johnny Ive a mental event, a mental breakdown to imagine that there was like a connected battery pack to an Apple product instead of like this sleek aluminium whatever. But it is interesting that like this is then the thing that Cook is trying to establish the legacy of. One, because like this is not exactly the metaverse. You know, the metaverse is a different thing. But the idea that there's like a headset where you see shit overlaid is very metaverse-y.
It's very 2021.
It's very much part of that world. And it's kind of interesting that's all coming out at the same time that like the conversation is switching over to AI. The metaverse is so not working. The Facebook one is terrible. Everyone's having a bad time.
No one wants the product.
Nobody wants the product. And it looks like Apple's about to bet the farm on it. Although, I think you're right in that the fact they're launching something that's a little bit boutique and not for mass audience and very expensive is that if it doesn't work, they can be like, well, we'll just go back to making the iPhone 17 or whatever.
Yeah.
So it could be fine.
No, you're right. It's going to feel kind of weird when everyone's talking about AI. Like Facebook, Meta is talking about AI.
Yeah.
And everything AI for Apple to kind of be like, and virtual reality again.
Yeah, and the AR.
With the AR component, but my understanding is that this is going to be very limited, if any AR at all. Like it's going to be a virtual reality device because the AR just isn't ready.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's true, but that was kind of the rumors that I heard.
Yeah, that's right. Because you're right, actually. Because the most, again, the information reported in pretty good detail on what was going on there. And one of the things is that when you go into like the AR mode, it's all in black and white. Like you can see through it, but it's black and white, and then things are projected on top. Just for clarity, for those that are like, "What the fuck are you guys talking about?" It's literally a headset that you can put on and like work and play and whatever. But things are projected onto screens in front of your eyes instead of a phone in your hand. And there's no clear vision yet as to why, at least not one that's public, as to like why this would be good or why it's better than the phone. But it's clear that Apple's like, well, this is the next frontier and we need to own the platform the same way that we have so conclusively with the phone.
Yeah, but interestingly, at least from the meta perspective, and whenever you hear about the metaverse and virtual reality, you kind of hear it's good for two things. The original one obviously being gaming and online communities or whatever. You're in a virtual space and you're just kind of mucking about. You're gas bagging and viewing virtual art together and maybe playing a game of poker or something. Then the other one, which I feel like kind of was tacked on a bit later, but people were saying, no, actually, this is useful, especially in the era of COVID and remote work, of having virtual meetings and productivity. There's the classic, obviously, getting in a room with everyone together and sitting around a virtual table, I guess, and having your meeting. You have presence as opposed to being on Zoom, which has all of the awkward natures of video conferencing. Apple is not good at either of those worlds. Social media / gaming.
They're terrible at both.
Business. They have these kind of business tools, but as you mentioned on the other episode, like even numbers, when you open numbers, their spreadsheet software, it's like household budget. It's obviously not made for enterprise, even though there is Apple for work or whatever, but they really have just not, they haven't really leaned in at all.
No, totally. They were really early out the gate with a really, truly great native video standard, FaceTime. FaceTime came out with the iPhone 4 in like 2010 or something. From the get-go was like better than Skype. Like, as long as you're obviously messaging, like calling someone else on an iPhone, better than Skype. They never even attempted to turn it into like a business feature, and they keep loading features onto it. I don't know who is even using FaceTime. Zoom would surely be the standard right now, which also speaks to the general fact that Apple have tried to undergo over the past 5 years, maybe a little bit more, a real pivot into being like a services company. This has been one of Tim Cook's initiatives. Yes, we dominate hardware. We dominate App Store. So like our App Store is the most profitable by far, even if it's like full of junk, awful video game clones and shit. Looks like it. They still make the lion's share of mobile profits.
But that's where they tack all of that revenue into services revenue. This is the thing that, as you say, they're pivoting to being a services company, which when they say services in the presentations, it'll be like Apple Music, iCloud, Apple TV, Apple Fitness Plus. When you think services, think those. But actually, their services revenue is all basically coming from their 30% margin on the App Store, because that's seen as a service. Their advertising on the App Store, like advertising revenue that is generated from the App Store, which again is massive, and Google paying them $15 billion a year to be the default search engine. Yeah. That's all bundled into quote-unquote services revenue. And so when you think like Apple services, it's, like friggin' slot machine-esque clones and Google.
Yeah. No, you're right. But it has been interesting because, they were the leading light of music digital distribution. iTunes used to be like the big dog in that for a while. They relatively successfully made the switch to Apple Music. I don't think it's king, as someone who uses it.
But they were also solving a problem there, right? They had the upper hand against record labels at that time because of piracy. They were solving piracy as the issue. But all of a sudden, when the problem to be solved in services is actually being solved by other people, kind of they got less of leverage.
Their leverage was massively reduced. And it was solving a problem. But Apple have always been not that great at services. As we talked about, their Office suite, which is the iWork suite. I don't even think they call it iWork.
Well, if you look up Apple for work or whatever, we give discounts to businesses who want to bulk purchase MacBooks.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. iCloud is better than it used to be, but like a complete mess, basically. If you go to the iCloud for web and look at all the services they have, like you can get to Pages on the web. And I'm like, do even like 10 people use that? In the whole world use Pages for web. Their old service before iCloud was Mobile Me, which was their original cloud syncing service.
Well, I mean, even the Apple your email has changed so many times. Remember at me?
At me.com, yeah. I still have an at me.com that's like where I route all my spam, basically. Yeah. They released Apple TV. They've launched Apple TV and put an insane amount of effort into building up their original programming. Keep in mind, Apple TV is the only streaming service that only has Apple TV originals. You don't just subscribe to Netflix or Amazon Prime and get
Seinfeld or whatever.
Exactly, all this shit. It's literally just Apple original. And you can tell if you watch them, Apple TV originals have some of the biggest budgets and the slickest production. They're head and shoulders above Netflix in that regard. But they're kind of betting the farm on Ted Lasso. If you really fucking love Ted Lasso.
Yeah, well, yeah. I've never watched it and never intend on doing it. The whole concept of it just makes my spine crawl. But, it's just a feature.
No, it is just a feature.
It's just another amazing feature and a reason why that
totally. It is.
Really happy with the Apple ecosystem and will continue to increasingly give them incremental recurring revenue every month or whatever.
Yeah, no, totally. No, I agree. It's still just kind of like, with Tim Cook making apparently a fairly substantial internal pivot as well to like, we are not just someone who dominates in hardware, but we are the services company. For them to be like, all right, we've got Apple TV, Apple News Plus. Also, a funny little anecdote, when I was a Business Insider, we were on Apple News. We got a bucket load of traffic on it. I remember when I first started working there, I audited our Apple News numbers based on no one putting really any effort into maintaining them. And I was like, these numbers are absolutely insane. The amount of people who are reading Business Insider Australia content. Yeah. And I was like, this is incredible. And then I audited like the demographic figures. And like, it was literally an absurd percentage of those people were over 60 years old, for one. And B, it was so poorly managed on Apple's part that it may as well have been nobody because it was so hard to monetize those people. Yeah. They had their own ad product, which was kind of like, which has gotten better since. But it's like, we have, through you, hundreds of thousands of people more, millions being served content, and your like way of actually turning that into revenue is just nothing. It may as well have just been made up. Yeah, essentially. Yeah. Another example,
not enough focus.
How they just throw stuff out there. They're heading into 2023 into the future with like a suite of new services. They're making laptops that have ports again and like rejigging their way.
The thing is, the hardware, other than God knows what this VR thing's going to mean, the hardware is very good. Yeah. And getting better. They're great at the hardware. Like the M1s, M2s, the processors, the chips are incredible. Yeah. The laptops are fantastic again. I like the line. I like the Studio. See what happens with the Mac Pro. Like
we should have mentioned like the transition from like the Intel chips to the like Apple built chips.
Oh, I mean,
was like
huge.
Just an incredible win. And people thought that would be like a disaster. And it turned out the performance on those chips, the output is just insane for what it was like a quantum leap forward for computing, basically.
Yeah, because as opposed to integrating the Intel chips, they were able to design from scratch a fully integrated chip. It's just create and add things like neural chips and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, doing it. Hardware is fantastic. The phones are fantastic. We know that. A lot of the products are fantastic. But more broadly, the push into services, I would say, I mean, they make a lot of money. They make a lot of money off the App Store, but then they have to create things like Apple Arcade to fix the issue that the App Store is completely fucked. If they want to keep getting revenue from these games, every game is based on gems or some exorbitant subscription or whatever it is that is designed to milk you from as much money as possible and put every dynamic they can into the games in order to just extract money. So in order to avoid that mechanism, they have to invent something like Apple Arcade.
Netflix of games, which is just all...
like a services product or whatever, but it's like you're fixing a problem that you created. The Google thing is weird, way to make lots of money a year. At business, as we said, they don't have it. And thirdly, the home automation. There are basically three players in that, Amazon, Google, and Apple. I'm someone who's about to kit out my house with literally switches in the wall, and I would like to use Apple HomeKit, but it's so bad. Siri is so bad, which leads us to like AI. Like, what are they doing about AI? They obviously have a team there. Their hardware is fantastic at running it. As we talked about in the AI episode, running AI locally is the iPhones already are like more than capable of doing a decent job with some of the shitter models, but like in the future, obviously they'll be able to run GPT-4s, 5s, etc. And an obvious use case for AI and large language models is
Siri or voice assistants.
It makes Siri seem even dumber. The fact that you can have these interactions with ChatGPT and back and forths about topics and refer to previous conversations, that all of a sudden when you ask Siri, like, is it going to rain today? And she says no. And then it's like, well, it's raining right now. I can't say to her or him or them, but it's raining now. You can't say that to Siri, right?
It's got no idea what you're talking about.
It's got absolutely no idea what you're talking about. What are they doing there?
Yeah, no, especially now that they've kind of, seems like they've thrown the kitchen sink at like virtual reality. The current conversation is like dominated by AI. They very clearly have a very large and proficient AI team. They're one of the wealthiest companies in the world. It's like been an eternal focus for a while. They've got like a machine learning team that writes papers and everything like that, which are publicly available. They're obviously working on it, but it's like, yeah, what are they doing? They would be I think they're the only big tech company over the past few months, as everyone's got ChatGPT fever or whatever, who has said like nothing about it. And, you know, this is the classic Apple playbook where they wait for all the initial entrants to kind of burn themselves out and fuck up and make things that are not that great for the consumer. And then they come in with a big showy finish and say, hey, look, you can do X. And it's really smooth and easy. Although, I guess their problem is that in this instance, 100 million people are using ChatGPT, at least, and they haven't said a single thing about it. It's an interesting sort of like power dynamic going into the next 10 years or whatever.
Yeah. The one thing they did do quite swiftly was optimize their neural engine so that LLMs work more efficiently on it, which was impressive. They moved really quick with doing that on the iPhones. But given their history of services, which I'd say, like, yes, as a shareholder, they're earning like year on year fantastic growth in services revenue. But when you dig into the numbers, as I said, some of it is from somewhat sketchy not sketchy, but not what one would think immediately when you think about services. Yeah. So can I rely, if I'm going to invest my home into basically an Apple services products and the Apple services universe of products, can I rely on that, well, it's Apple, they'll enter, I'm sure it'll be great? Or should I, does Microsoft have a chat thing?
Yeah, Cortana.
Cortana.
Which is the thing from Halo or whatever.
Should I go with Cortana?
We're a Cortana household.
Maybe. Get a Windows laptop running.
Yeah.
And a Nokia.
Yeah. So I guess like, you know, the big thing is like, it seems like the Apple headset will be announced this year, most likely, in the next few months even. It's the first kind of like Tim Cook product. Tim Cook is famously known as a guy who's not like the Steve Jobs inspirational.
He's a supply chain guy.
He's a guy who created the most militarily efficient supply chain probably in modern history.
Yeah.
His whole job is like browbeating Chinese suppliers.
Well, which is another thing for them. I should mention, I heard that, you know, obviously the China thing is an issue with America and blah, blah, blah. They have been getting India. They've outsourced a bunch of production to India. And just as an example of how hard it is to just move your supply chains, they have a certain casing for the iPhone that they expect the error rate to be something like 0.0001%, with the goal being 0% error rate. So, you know, you get one slightly faulty or misaligned casing for every 100,000 cases that are produced in China at the moment out of this China factory. In India, the error rate on the batch that has just been completed was 50%.
Yeah. There's a lot of hubbub about India being the new manufacturing hub. And it will get to that point.
Yeah, I'm sure it will get to it.
I have no doubt. But it's just like
building up that wealth of knowledge and experience.
The absurd like supply chain expertise that China has developed over the past 40 years cannot be like willed into it will take decades to build. But that's Tim Cook's kind of like area of expertise. He is not like a dreamy product thinker. He's not a guy who sits down and goes, how can I use technology to have the children of today be inspired to create?
Johnny Ives probably would have seen that 9/11 thing and applauded.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. Tim Cook's more thinking like, how can I get on the phone to Mr. Shen to get yield up by 0.2% by tomorrow? We're going to see if he's able to like his first proper quote-unquote revolutionary product, if that's actually going to work. And if it doesn't, I'm saying it, Apple, bearish.
I'm not willing to go that far. Down Round now has a premium version. We have subscriber-only version where we go a little deeper on certain topics. We probably are a little bit more honest, I would say.
A little bit more, off the cuff, shooting from the hip.
Yeah, and if you really want to get deep on a lot of the topics we discussed, then you should sign up to be a premium subscriber. $7 a month. It's on Substack. You get an extra episode a week. That's pretty cheap. Like, we're talking less than $2 an episode.
Exactly.
What kind of value is that?
In this world today, nowhere.
What can you buy for $1.70? That's you, listener. Answer me. If you email me and tell me something that's actually like really good and great value, that's not another subscription, that's worth $1.70 and provides terrific amount of value, we will give you 1 month free.
Absolutely. Send us an email at downroundpod@gmail.com. Or if you don't want to waste your time doing that, thank you, head to downround.net or downround.substack.com or Google Downround. There are a million ways to find us and sign up. $7 a month, $7 a year. We'll see you in there.